Hello everyone. Welcome back for our history lesson 3, the Delhi Sultans. We begin with the last and the fourth part of our session. Today we are going to just discuss and see about the administration and consolidation under the Khiljis and the Tughlaqs. Then we just are going to compare the administrative policies undertaken or planned by Khiljis and Tughlaqs. And finally, we study about the Said dynasty and the Lodi dynasty. So, administration and consolidation under the Khiljis and the Tughlaqs. So, now we all know that in the courts of the sultans or the emperors, they generally prefer to appoint landowners or rich people as their governors or ministers. But during the Sultanate period, especially for during Iltutmish's rule, he preferred appointing his slaves for these purposes. So rather than appointing the aristocrats, that is the rich people, and the landed chieftains as governors, he favored special slaves which were purchased for military services called bandagan in Persian. Since these slaves or bandagans were totally dependent upon the master or the sultan could always trust and rely upon them. So, for example, we have Malik Kafur, or who is also known as Hazar Dinari, who was a slave for Alauddin Khilji. And I hope you know the story about Malik Kafur, how he has helped Alauddin Khilji in many of his military campaigns. Then these slaves were also very loyal to their masters. So new sultans had their own servants. So the authors of Persian Tawarikhs generally criticized the sultans for appointing the low and baseborn to the high offices. So like earlier or in the last year, what we have learned is these emperors generally preferred their close relatives or close friends, or the offices were given according to the hierarchy, or it was like ancestors and next generations would be taking that particular offices. But here during the Sultanate period, it was so that the sultans always trusted on their slaves rather than any of the close relative or the nobles in the court. So it was not like generation to generation working on the same offices. So they trusted their slaves a lot. And as we know, the authors of the Tawarikh, they generally criticized these sultans because they are appointing the slaves on high positions in the court. So which was not actually seen to be a correct act in those time periods. Yes, now the Khiljis and the Tughlaq monarchs appointed military commanders as governors of territories of varying sizes. So, as there were different military commanders, they were appointed as governors for certain land pieces or the territories, and they were of different sizes as well. And these land pieces or those territories were known as Ikta, and these owners or the holders of that particular land were called as iktadar or mukti. And what was their duty? So their duty was to lead the military campaigns. Whenever there was a warlike situation, these were the people who would lead those military campaigns or the battles. And then they also had another duty of maintaining law and order in their territory, as well as in the territories which are surrounding their own iktas. So this is one of the important part which was followed during the Khiljis and the Tughlaq rule. Then, in exchange of these military services, they collected revenues of their assignments as salary. So now, when these military commanders have their own territories, the land was given to them, they used to collect the revenues from the people who were residing in that territory, and that was their salary. So they were providing the military services to the Sultan, and in turn, they were collecting the revenue from the people residing in their territory, and that was considered as their salary. They also paid their soldiers from these revenues. Now, these were military commanders, and under them, they had a few soldiers who were required for wars and battles. So their salaries was also to be paid from the revenues which they are going to collect from the territories. Now these muktis or these iqtidars should not collect a lot of revenue from the people who are residing in the territory. And so to keep a check on that, there were certain accountants who were appointed by the sultan or by the state. So these accountants had a duty to cross check and verify what is the exact amount of revenue that is collected by these military commanders or the iqtidars, and accordingly keep a record of it. And yes, there were certain kinds of taxes which people had to pay even during those times. So what are the different taxes that people paid? So generally it was on cultivation, which was known as kharaj, and the peasants had to pay 50% of whatever produce they are going to get, whatever yield they are going to get from their agricultural area. So 50% would be paid as tax. Yes, tax on cattle and tax on houses as well. So these were the different types of taxes and revenue collections by the military commanders, and accountants kept a check on that. I hope this point is clear to each and every one of you. Yes. Now the next one. We always said earlier in our sessions that there were a lot many Mongol invasions, and these people were these people or these sultans were trying to consolidate all the hinterlands, try to keep a watch on distant territories as well, and how the keeping watch on the other territories or on the other garrison towns was difficult. It was like bad weather or the Mongol invasion, the rebellions and war. All were these were all the reasons which we studied, like why they wanted to consolidate their empire. So the Mongols, the Mongolian tribe, who were said to be very powerful, and during the rule of Genghis Khan, we have heard his name, one of the cruel rulers of the Mongols. So when he was actually a leader for the Mongolian tribe, he invaded Transoxiana, which is in Iran, in the year 1219. And even the Delhi Sultans faced the invasions of Genghis Khan many a times. These Mongol attacks on Delhi Sultanate increased during the reign of Alauddin Khilji and maybe towards the starting of Muhammad bin Tughlaq's rule. So this forced the rulers to take certain decisions to mobilize a large standing army in Delhi, which posed a huge administrative challenge. So to actually stop the attack from Genghis Khan's army, these two rulers had to take a lot of decisions for their armies. And that was actually a difficult phase which these two rulers faced. It was a challenge for their administrative skills. So now let's see what was their stand when they were getting Mongol invasions day to day. So we just have seen about Alauddin Khilji and Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Now we just have a comparative study about the administrative policies and challenges that they faced and how they solved those challenges, right? So here we go. So we're talking about Alauddin Khilji. When there were Mongol invasions, he himself raised a standing army as a defensive measure. So he increased the number of people in his army so that they could defend the Mongol army. Wherein Muhammad bin Tughlaq, he raised large standing army and planned the attack on Transoxiana. So, if you just compare, Alauddin Khilji did not think of destroying the base of Genghis Khan in Iran. But then Muhammad bin Tughlaq, he also raised a standing army but planned and sent his army to Iran. Then that was actually a very economically very difficult, and even people were killed while going due to the bad weather conditions, due to the physical features of our subcontinent. So Alauddin Khilji was a successful ruler in this way if we see. The next was like Alauddin Khilji constructed a new garrison town for the residence of his soldiers, which was named as Siri. So he himself tried to construct a garrison town where his soldiers could reside. Whereas Muhammad bin Tughlaq, rather than constructing a new garrison town, he asked the residents to empty the old cities and they were sent to his new capital, Daulatabad. So soldiers were garrisoned in the old cities. So now it was actually difficult to just move all the citizens or the residents from those old cities to a different place, taking up all their belongings, taking up their family members. It was really difficult to move to Daulatabad. And he did so because he wanted place for his soldiers to reside. So those cities were emptied. So again, we could just compare like Alauddin Khilji took a good decision, a fair decision, wherein he provided a proper place for his soldiers. And Muhammad bin Tughlaq, again a failure over here because shifting all the residents from three old cities was really very difficult. A lot of money was spent in that. Then these soldiers had to be fed also. It's not that they are just given a place of residence, but they had to be fed. So this was done to the produce collected as tax. Right, as we discussed that kharaj was one of the tax that was collected from the peasants. So this yield what was collected was used to feed the soldiers, and then produce from the same area was collected as tax to feed the army. But to meet the expense of maintaining a large army, the Sultan charged additional taxes. Now, what did Alauddin Khilji do? He was residing in Delhi, right? He constructed a town named Siri over there, but he collected the tax from the areas between Ganga and Yamuna. So it was not from that same area from where the soldiers were staying. But here, Muhammad bin Tughlaq, what did he do? From the same area where he had made settlements for the army, from there, he collected a lot of tax. He charged extra taxes to the people, maybe to feed the army. And that was again a kind of failure because this coincided with the famine in that area. So during those days, they faced a large famine for a long time, and so there was actually a economic declination we can say, or a decrease in his monetary treasure. Then the salary of the soldiers were paid in cash instead of iktas. Now Alauddin Khilji decided that instead of giving the land or the territories to the soldiers, it is better we pay them in cash, and he took the control of prices of goods in Delhi. So he kept a watch on the prices that the people should not increase or raise the prices, so that the soldiers could afford whatever salary they are getting in. Muhammad bin Tughlaq, whereas he paid the salary in cash, and instead of controlling the prices, he used a token currency which was made out of cheap metal. I guess it was copper which he started using. Those were the cheap coins which were made that could be exchanged for their daily needs. And it was so that people could easily mint these coins at home. So it was again a failure. So everyone had a lot of coins of that cheap metal, and they used to pay the revenue or the taxes in using these cheap metals, whereas they got the salaries or rewards in the form of gold and silver coins. So this was again a failure because this metal was very cheap and anyone could imitate and make it at home very easily. So finally, while after observing all these points, after discussing all these points, our historians have come to a conclusion that the administrative measures taken by Alauddin Khilji were quite successful. And yes, many of the chroniclers praise him for his rule. It was a just rule. He took care of his soldiers and the people very well. Whereas the administrative measures taken by Muhammad bin Tughlaq were a great failure. Yes, I hope whatever we discussed till now, you're clear with it. If still any doubts, as usual, keep a note of it. We'll discuss it later. Now, just some points about the Sultanate, maybe after the Tughlaq dynasty. So, after the Tughlaq dynasties, we have the Saids and the Lodi dynasty. They ruled Delhi and Agra, say around up to 1526. By then, many of the areas of the subcontinent were ruled by independent rulers and who actually established flourishing states and prosperous capitals. So, some of the areas were like Jaunpur, Bengal, Malwa, Gujarat, and almost the entire southern part of India. During this period, also certain new ruling groups started emerging. Some of these states were establishing during this period were very small, but they were indeed powerful and extremely well administered. Say about from 1540 to 45, Sher Shah Sur, a manager of a small territory of his uncle in Bihar. So in Bihar, Sher Shah Sur was a manager for a small area. He challenged and defeated the Mughal Emperor Humayun. We'll study more about this in the next chapter, but this is just an outline for y'all. And Sher Shah Sur happened to capture Delhi and established his own dynasty, which was known as Sur dynasty or the Suri dynasty because he is also known as Sher Shah Suri. He introduced a few elements from Alauddin Khilji's administrative ideas and even made them more efficient. So some of the administrative ideas or elements were picked up by Sher Shah Sur and some were made more efficient as time passed. And then Sher Shah Sur's administration actually has been a role model, and even the great emperor Akbar, when Akbar consolidated his empire, he also happened to follow certain administrative elements from Sher Shah Sur's administration. So this is what happened during the 15th and the 16th century. It's just a brief about Sher Shah Sur. So actually after the Lodi dynasty, we have Babur coming into picture and we have the starting of the Mughal Empire in our subcontinent. So we deal with that in the next chapter. So that is all from my side. Thank you. And I hope that you all have understood the points that we have discussed today. If not, please do make a note of it so we can discuss when we meet for our sessions. So till then, take care, bye, stay healthy, stay safe.